my name is Benoît Durand. I'm a partner at RBB Economics, and I have the honor to moderate this session on merger policy in digital markets. So very, very briefly, quick introduction. Mergers, we think we know what they are. At least we know how to address or assess their competitive effect. There are competition agencies, particularly the European Commission, has published guidelines on horizontal mergers, non-horizontal mergers. Typically, the Commission and other agencies will apply those guidelines, although in booking e-Travely, the Commission did not apply the merger guidelines, and one could argue that perhaps because it is in a digital market, so maybe digital markets are so special that we do not need to apply guidelines. Anyway, what makes digital markets special? They may be a different animal. They may be different from standard markets. According to Kramer and all, in the report for the European Commission in 2019, they have identified the tendency of this market to be concentrated, and notably because of strong network effect, extreme economies of scale and scope, and data. Those would be barriers to entry that would lead at least to some sort of tipping on concentration. First, to my right, we have Tzanaki, who is a lecturer in law at the University of Leeds, affiliate fellows of the Stigler Center at Chicago Booth Business School, senior research fellow at the UCL Center of Law, Economic and Society, affiliated scholar of the DCI, so you're home. And she's also an associate editor of the Journal of Competition Law and Economics and Competition Policy International, and her research focused on competition law and policy, M&A, corporate governance and finances, law and economics, EU and comparative law. Then to my left, we have Juliana Domingues, who traveled a long way from Brazil. She's a law professor at the University of Sao Paulo, and she's the leader of the Competition and Innovation Research Group at that university. She's also a non-governmental advisor of the International Competition Network, I presume for Gadget, and a founder of the network Women in Antitrust. She's a former, so she has also worked for the government. She's a former National Secretary for Consumers Affairs in Brazil, and also a former Attorney General of Brazilian Antitrust Authority, known as Gadget. Thank you. And then we have Marc Ivaldi, who is a professor of economics at TSE, so Toulouse School of Economics, and at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. I thought I could never say that. He's president of the French Association of Transport Economics and conference director of the World Conference on Transport Research 2026. He's an academic affiliate with NEAR Economics Consulting. He's also an expert in the use of empirical and quantitative methods for competition and regulation policy, and has advised firms as well as public authority on a wide range of issues in industrial organization. Much of his research work has been devoted to the analysis of network industry, including transport, telecom, and digital markets. So on this note, as you are an expert in digital market too, Marc, can you add a few words as well from your experience and your research on merger policy in digital market?
Thank you, Benoît, and thank you, the organizer, for inviting me to speak in this very interesting panel. There have been a lot of discussion so far and a lot of concepts discussed. So I wanted to cast everything in a simple, in an example, maybe not simple. The first time I learned about merger in digital market was when I studied a merger in the digital TV market in France. So it's not completely digital in the sense there is no data, but the technology is fully digital. Case is interesting because each TV channel is a two-sided platform with viewers on one side and advertiser on the other side. TV channel provide broadcasting services, so news, movies, sports for free to viewers, but receive revenue from advertising. So de facto, viewers pay for receiving advertising on their TV set. But the price to watch TV is zero. So there is, moreover, there is competition among TV platforms. And in addition to that, there is complementarity and substitutability of advertising campaign depending on the size of the viewership of different channels. By the way, I heard only about complementarity here, but there are sometimes substitutability between platforms. I will say that this is a description of what has been called here an ecosystem. Given the discussion that although there is no modularity, at least there is interdependence and complementarity. With my co-author, so we look at this merger in France between a large TV channel and two small ones. The authorities, the French authority, approved the merger of their broadcasting services, but imposes the behavioral remedies at their respective advertising service remain separated for the reason that the merged advertising sales service will have been super dominant on the advertising market. So for the reason that they will have created almost an essential facility, I will say a gatekeeper, if we use the words that now are used in digital market. What it is interesting is that we empirically proved that the behavioral remedy was inefficient and useless. Because the externality between the two sides of the market and because of the complementarity of advertising campaign of this channel involved in the merger, the basic idea, to simplify because it's complicated to see the whole mechanism, is that if the merged entity increase too much advertising, it will risk to lose too many viewers. Because, of course, there is a negative externality of advertising. So what is interesting here is that there is a kind of self-regulation of the market. And the type of self-regulation that we can see in biological population, in life science. So I think that the world ecosystem works very well for this case because of that. But sometimes the self-regulation is not working. And our simulation results also shows that a merger between the two main dominant TV channels in France will have been harmful for the consumer surplus of viewers. So I think it's an interesting case. I must point first thing the extreme complexity of the algorithm to solve this type of equilibrium. I'm not going into the detail, but believe me, it took us a lot of time to find the solution, mathematical solution for that. Now, go back to internet industry. On the internet industry, users search the web free of charge and trigger advertisement, which generate revenues for the firms that supply the search engines. So the internet industry is similar to the digital TV industry. Unfortunately, I've never seen any econometric study of the ecosystem of internet industry based on models similar to the one we use for the TV market. Neither in the economic literature, nor in the decision taken by different competition authorities. It means that there is no structural analysis to help us predicting the effect on internet market of different policies aimed at regulating the market power in this market. So I must confess that while we are talking about taking into account dynamic capability into merger and policy, there's not even an empirical structural analysis in a static setup to measure the welfare gains or losses of the functioning of the internet market. So I'm not saying that we do not need a dynamic analysis, and because, first of all, because I like very much the work of Ariel, and because I think that it is very important, but because, and I can develop that, but it will take too much time, because the trade-off between static efficiency and dynamic efficiency, they are negatively correlated, Richard, is at the core of the working of network industry, and in particular, digital industry. So we can discuss the reason for this lack of cost-benefit analysis of digital market, impossibility to access the data, particularly academics have a lot of difficulty to get access to data produced on internet, complexity of algorithm, lack of human resources, ecosystem of competition policy, or other reasons. Anyway, I'm surprised that the tremendous progress in econometric analysis is not mobilized in the analysis of merger in digital market, because I think that any piece of empirical evidence, even imperfect, is better than no evidence. Probably it is the rapid and permanent evolution in the digital industry that has put the focus on dynamic competition and on innovation and not on the consumer surplus. But it is important to say that it was not fully new. I agree with Richard that innovation was not absent of former guidelines. For example, the future competition was one of the criteria to account for in the former market definition notice at the European level. Anyway, one recent concern is whether large technology firms acquire firms that could become competitors to discontinue them. These mergers are known as killer acquisition. Together with Nicolas and Celsuc, we did a study that Richard mentioned, and we look at 12 cases investigated and approved by the Commission, 12 cases involving one of the GAFAs and a small firm. For instance, Apple Beats and Google Fitbit. There are not too many. There are too many cases like that. We took all of them that are available under the criteria that I mentioned. To evaluate this merger, whether this merger is a killer acquisition, we look at the competitor perceptions to see if the target is still alive post-acquisition. We use also competitor official statement to see the situation in terms of market share and whether the merger has weakened competition. And the third test was also to look at this official statement to see if there is evidence that there is still competition and there are entry of a new competitor or a new product. Our conclusion was that the Commission did a very good job in approving these mergers, because we did not get any evidence of a kill strategy behind these mergers. Of course, we studied the mergers that the ones that are above the thresholds for investigation. Should we consider that killer acquisition only concern mergers that are below the thresholds? It is a question that remains to be answered. It is true that the risk of approving a merger while it is anti-competitive, the type 2 error, is probably in general higher than the type 1 error, that is to say the probability of prohibiting a merger which is competitive. But what we cannot say is that there is no evidence that the risk of not investigating a merger while it is a killer acquisition is significant. So what it is interesting in our study, and it is a form of self-criticism, it is that the consumer has disappeared from the analysis. We look at the perception of competitors, of the firm involved in the merger. We did not look at the perception of consumers and what they get or lose from the merger. Moreover, our study is just an ex post evaluation. It is probably useful, but it cannot pretend to predict whether this merger could end up finally at some point in the future to be killer acquisition or to innovation enhancing mergers. So thank you for I hope that I was in time.
You are doing okay.
We bargained before, of course.
I think, but thank you, Mark. Thank you very much for this expose. So, a good segue, because you discussed killer acquisition, and one of the issues for authorities, in addition to maybe having the tools or the analytical tools to review those mergers and those killer acquisition mergers in digital market, there is a legal question of thresholds, because not all transactions are notified to the authorities. And for those of you who have followed the news in Brussels, all the legal community has been very excited by the Illumina Grail saga. So I think Anna is going to give us a few insight on this issue. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here in such a wonderful panel. I think my presentation actually fits in very well, following up from from David, and Mark, because I'm trying to, I have written, my presentation will be based on an article that I've written, and I'm revising it now in view of the Illumina Grail case that was decided before the European Court of Justice. And talks about jurisdictional aspects and how we can capture mergers involving digital players, especially killer acquisitions, when one of those players is a small company, probably with no turnover yet, so no essential presence in the market. And in Europe, unlike the US, David mentioned before that perhaps why we had this permissive era of antitrust enforcement was because a lot of those mergers were non-reportable. And unlike the US, where mergers that are non-reportable can be subject to enforcement and liability ex post, in the EU we cannot do that. So we have the merger regulation in the EU that is based on turnover thresholds, And if you fall above those thresholds, the Commission has jurisdiction to review the merger, but if it doesn't, that's an absolute bar also to liability. So the system is very different to the US system. And then this raises the question whether, you know, what Professor Ivaldi also said, that we don't know actually what is happening below the radar in Europe. And this is more so because, you know, those thresholds have not really changed over time. So, well, how I got this inspiration to do this article, I've read this famous article, maybe the economists in the room know it, by Thomas Wolfman, that talks about stealth acquisitions and is trying to basically evaluate the deterrence effects of merger enforcement. So one insight is I got, okay, the thresholds that we have in Europe, maybe they're not perfect, and maybe the Commission is right to be concerned about acquisitions falling below the radar, especially killer acquisitions, as they put it, because in Europe, maybe the under-enforcement gap could be more significant. So that is a legitimate concern. Now, the thresholds had not only substantive, let's say, shortcomings, the deterrence question that I just mentioned. I'm suggesting in this article that they also had perhaps jurisdictional shortcomings, in the sense that the thresholds were based on turnover, and only very, very big and probably cross-border mergers would be above those thresholds. The assumption implicit in those thresholds, therefore, was that, you know, only very big deals had pan-European significance. And now the new research that was developed based on killer acquisitions, or in general acquisitions involving small companies, is whether those assumptions are right. And it seems that the Commission felt uncomfortable not reviewing a substantial amount of mergers happening in digital and innovation markets, where indeed not both companies would hit those thresholds. So there was a discussion of how we could establish European jurisdiction over those transactions. Now, so I'm suggesting that the second part of the problem of the thresholds was basically an externality problem, in the sense that perhaps not all very large mergers could have only pan-European cross-border effects. And perhaps we should look at them again. Now, the second issue that I'm analyzing in this article is the political dimension. This is more or less the technical dimension that I mentioned, and then the Commission found a provision in the merger regulation called Article 22 of the EUMR that tried to interpret more expansively in order to gain jurisdiction over those mergers. And this is one of the provisions that we have that is part of a case referral system, as we call it in the EU. So what does this do? It's basically, we have some exceptions in this very rigid and strict threshold rule in the EUMR to suggest that cases maybe that would have more local impact should go back to member states, should be referred from the Commission to member states, or under Article 22, it's the other way around. Some member states, some mergers that fall within national competence, perhaps should be referred to the Commission for review. And that article had a very interesting history. When it was originally agreed under the merger regulation, it was intended to capture mergers that would affect member states which did not have any merger rules or competence at all. And that is why it was called the Dutch clause, which means Netherlands or other member states, such as Belgium and so on, did not have any merger control regime at that time. Over time, that mechanism was expanded to capture cross-border cases, in cases where we had filings in more than 3 member states. This Article 22, again, could be triggered. and then the European Commission would gain jurisdiction to review the transaction. And the idea was that we wanted to minimize filings, okay, and have a more efficient review at the European level. Now, in latest years, there was a discussion of how we can expand jurisdiction at the EU level, as I mentioned, and the Commission has issued a guidance on this Article 22 back in 2021 that said that they can establish jurisdiction not only when a merger is notifiable at the member states, or in the previously 3 member states, for it to be referred, Article 22, but also when there was no national jurisdiction at all. And this has created a lot of debate. The Commission has pursued some cases on this matter. The first case was the Luminal Grail case, where the recent Court of Justice judgment is about, but there has been 2 more mergers that were eventually abandoned, and another one that was that referrals were attempted is the Microsoft Infection AI merger. But in the meantime, we had the Court of Justice judgment, and after that, the member states without competence decided that, oh, we cannot do that, and the Commission did not take any decision on that case. So all of these things are very intriguing, I think, and they raise a lot of questions of how we can capture, as I said, dynamic competition cases under from a jurisdictional point of view. So the thresholds were, the turnover thresholds basically had a very clear historical rationale, and that is that they were very certain and predictable. So everybody knew if their transaction will go to Brussels to be reviewed, or perhaps to member states if it was below the thresholds. But I'm suggesting in this article that there was a second dimension beyond the technical dimension, that there was, the thresholds reflected a certain political bargain between the member states, which were the original principles, delegating authority to the Commission. And if it was not that second political element, maybe the Court of Justice would have decided completely different, I think. But it meant that, you know, before, actually the thresholds meant to exclude any jurisdictional competition between the Commission and member states. Now, when there was this change in approach from a European policy point of view, the situation was that the Commission indirectly would take jurisdiction that was national in essence. And why is that problematic? I'm suggesting that perhaps from a system where we had a very clear-cut jurisdictional situation, I call it a zero-sum game. So what was not European competence was national competence, and the other way around. Now we go to a situation where there is no clear lines between the merger competence in certain cases, and that creates a non-zero-sum game, and in the sense that merger control and the review of those transactions can become both political and strategic, especially because one thing that I didn't mention about this referral mechanism is that it's based on discretion. So both the member states have discretion to refer a case to the Commission, and the Commission has discretion whether to accept or not those referrals. So from a very certain, basically, jurisdictional landscape in Europe, we went to a very uncertain one, and then the question is this better than what we had before? And I think probably not, because from a situation where you had perhaps under deterrence, now you go into a situation where you might have over deterrence of those transactions when you don't know what's going to happen. And the policy does not have, I think, is not well defined, at least yet, to know exactly which situations will be targeted. And I mean, I'm very sympathetic to the Commission. I think that they try to find a quick solution, as they say, and targeted. So there is a legitimate aspect in the sense that they didn't want to expand thresholds or introduce new thresholds based, for example, on transaction value, because that would, massively perhaps increase notifications and transaction costs. But at the same time, I think the policy still remains, incomplete, I would say. The good thing is now that we have this court judgment, so there is a lot of room, I think, for thinking of how we want to develop the system further. And it's interesting to think that the merger competence and the jurisdictional situation in merger control is completely different to the decentralized antitrust enforcement system that we have in Europe. So I'll leave it there, and we can discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much for this. So now that you discussed the question of a threshold and whether an authority can actually look or call in this transaction, Juliana is going to tell us what's happening in Brazil, and in particular, whether this transaction, this merger in digital market may require a different type of assessment. I understand that CAGI has done some thinking, and they are proposing perhaps to have specific guidelines for this transaction. So over to you, Juliana.
Thank you. So, good morning to everyone. Buongiorno. I used to say that my Italian is so good as Brad Pitt in Glorious Bastards, so I'm going to keep in English, right? But thank you so much for this kind invitation. I'm really glad to share the Brazilian perspective with you here. And I am among here professors that I follow for years. Like this year, I complete 25 years teaching antitrust in Brazil. And it was so cool during this time to see what is happening in my country. And of course, I think we have different perspectives, but when we talk about digital markets, we are almost in the same page. And I liked very much the presentation from Professor Richard, especially because he started with questions. And it was very clear for me that for us, it's totally different, especially when he started with, has merger enforcement ignored innovation during the 90s? Like in the 90s, we had no antitrust law in Brazil. In fact, our last law before the law in force, it was from 1994. So during the 90s, I was a teenager, and we were facing like a government trying to fix the prices. So for us, we are trying our best in Brazil to follow the best practices that we have, especially because, OECD did amazing work sharing and giving guidelines for us. So if you look back 20 years ago in Brazil and what CADE is doing now, I think they did a great job. And I am not inside CADE anymore, so I have my free speech. It means that I represent myself, not the authority anymore. But it was good to be there. I think it was good because I now have the complete picture about, the enforcement in Brazil. And I think that because of it, I don't have a romantic view for some proposals that they are trying to design, because we have problems related to budget in Brazil, related to capabilities in Brazil. And that's why I would like to share you some of those views. And the second question that was related to if enforcers systematically made errors or over-enforcement in the digital economy because they ignored innovation in their merger enforcement decisions, what I can share with you, based on Brazil case law, there is no over-enforcement in Brazil, not related to digital markets, not related to any market. I think that 84% of the digital merger cases from 1995 until 2023 were evaluated through the fast-track proceeding in Brazil. And besides, I think that CADE's case law indicates that the competition authority is trying to use the tools available Of course, sometimes we need to expand and try to find new tools for digital markets. But basically, CADI is following his own model. And when there are any kind of doubt related to, remedies, we are very conservative as a country, to make any kind of, or propose any interventions. And this is something that I think it's important, because even though we have now a proposal from the Minister of Finance, we have the whole history about our agency in Brazil that is very cautious, and I think we have good reasons to be just like that, right? Besides, I think that CADI is proposing the adoption of regulatory sandboxes to address new artificial intelligence, for example. I think this is a good way to touch those topics. But when we go through another question related to courts or agency ignoring the insights from dynamic capabilities framework, I think I have two visions to share. First, I'm going to talk about CADI, right? Because I think that the key challenge is always related to digital mergers is defining the relevant market. And narrowing or broadening the market boundaries, I think it's crucial to determine the market power and the concentration levels. And when we are talking about the digital markets, I think we have different models. And of course, it involves different abilities, and not only related to law and economics. Someone mentioned here the fact that we need to talk with computer scientists, and I totally agree. We are talking about markets that we don't know, and it gives an extra complexity to the cases, right? And I think that as we are open to involve people from different fields inside the authority, there is a very good work on, they are trying to do the best work they can with the tools they have. And for instance, I was trying to remember a case that I could share for you, and there is the Nesper Delivery Hero case from 2018. It's a case related to online restaurant delivery segment. It was new to the Brazilian Competition Authority. It was a new market. And this case required an analysis based on market tests and projections and potential entry of new competitors. But even though it was not really clear for the authority, the potential harm, the case was approved, and CADI decided to monitor the acquiring parties' future transactions due to uncertainty and some dynamics of the market, because they agreed that it was, the case demands attention, the dominant position in at least one segment could be noted by the authority. But in CADI's decision, the Brazilian Antitrust Authority is adopting like a dynamic approach rather than a static perspective. I think it's always considering the future, but if we have any kind of doubts about the effects, we are very conservative to make any kind of intervention. But when I talk about courts, it's less, how can I say that in a good word, right? But in Brazil, I have an anti-romantic view related to the courts. Of course, I was the Attorney General. I was fighting for CADI, and we have different courts in Brazil. We have a different system in Brazil. And yesterday, Mikhail mentioned that we need to consider how courts will interpret the decisions from the authority. And in Brazil, we have at least 500 cases under discussions. I mean, cases that were already cleared by CADI in different courts, no specialized courts. So I think it's a very sensitive thing that we have. It's the reality in Brazil, even antitrust law. I'm a professor from the University of São Paulo, but we just have 5% of the law schools that shows antitrust law to the students. So we have a gap, a very difficult gap to fulfill. And in Brazil, we don't have courts with technical expertise to handle regulatory issues or antitrust issues. And if I talk about digital markets, it's something very far from them. So this is a very critical thing. And of course, if we have time here, then I will see in the end of this, but I would like to hear from you also. How do you think we can bring or bridge this gap, especially in developing countries? Because this is a very difficult question, and besides, we should try to, connect much more the agents with the courts. We did this during the time I was there, but it's not enough to, give them the real perspective and to make them understand how antitrust works. And I cannot give many examples here, but because in fact, as we are just fighting for and competing with lunchtime, I would like to say a little bit about the proposal. I know many people here is curious about it. We had some proposals from the Lula administration, especially a recent study by the Minister of Finance. And among the concerns, of course, they are very important. The concerns related to exclusivity and self-preferencing practices, charging abuse price to enter in digital ecosystems, excessive price and charge due to the monopolistic position, killer acquisitions, and I think they are trying to balance the need for regulation and, of course, thinking about our capacity to address these concerns that we have. But what happened? They opened this for, a public call. So it was open in January and until the end of May. And we got like 301 contributions from 72 participants with diverse profiles. But I would like to ask you, the country that had the most significant number of participants, who do you think? United States, right? So we have many contributions from companies and people from United States, much more than from Brazil. So this is something, right, really fun. And of course, I think this is something that we should concern when we read, the whole note is like a technical note, because the views are much more related to the discussions here. We have this European and North American perspective here. It's not the reality in Brazil, in Latin America. And of course, I think you shared here, Anna, the same problem that we have related to the thresholds. And we are based in a turnover criteria in Brazil. I was criticizing this when we used to call the new law, but it's already 12 years ago, right? But the law brought this kind of criteria that we need to think about. I don't think it's fitting anymore, not only for digital markets, but we have some gaps related, especially here, we talk about new theories of harm, but it's not clear for us the harm. We don't know yet if we have a harm, This is something that really, in Brazil, I think this is the main point, that for the authority, of course, everybody's trying to follow the discussions. Brazil is very active. I think our authority is very active. But of course, we are not sure about the harms. Of course, that's why we cannot see preventive measures from Brazil sometimes. And the criteria is something that is important, but it's not going to solve the problems that we are also concerned. So they are trying also to propose new rules to bridge traditional antitrust law and economic regulation, giving new powers to CADE to, have a specialized unit on digital markets. But the problem is we don't have budget. right? We don't have budget to do it, and we don't have people to do it. So the idea is good, but if you ask me, oh, they are able to do that, not now. They are not able to do it now. And besides that, I think there is a good thing related to the work done by the Minister of Finance. They declare that CADE is the authority that can be responsible for that. This is good news, because you must know the other authorities that we have in Brazil. This is the best news, you know, because CADE, in fact, is the best regulator that could do it, right? But as I know, and as I shared here for you, we have this problem related to capacity and also related to budget. So the creation of this specialized unit depends on several things. The change of the thresholds is something that this government can do, but the rest, it depends, you know, decree or law, and my experience, like participating with the discussions related to any law, it's just like the law started with a face of a dog and ends with a tail of, you know, a cow. It's something really difficult because we have different people working on this kind of discussions. Many of them, they don't know nothing about antitrust regulation and law and economics. So it's very important, even though it was funny for me to see how many Americans they were participating on this debate. I think, as you know much more than many of the parties in Brazil, it's very important to have the academics, you know, the interest groups and think tanks working on it, because it gives much more, you know, subsidies to Brazil. So I just have 1 minute. I would like to thank you so much for you know, this opportunity. For me, since the beginning, I was learning a lot with all the discussions here. About Brazil, I think we are always trying to follow the best practices, following the steps of, you know, jurisdictions that have more experience. But at that time, I think we are trying to create something new based on our reality. I wouldn't be so anxious about the proposals from the Minister of Finance, because I know that it's difficult for political environment and for all the rules that need to be changed to have everything that was proposed done. But I think it's a beginning, and it's very good to talk about it and to share it with you. And I hope you have time, then you can give me back your impressions about it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. So anyway, we started late, so I believe we can claim our time for questions. And I know that already some people have questions. All right, that started well. Before we do that, I just wanted, because I wanted to give the opportunity to Rich to come back, maybe if he has a few thoughts on what you heard, or if not, you want to...
well, let's see.
Let's see the question. Okay, let's move then to the question. So Ariel first, and then we got Inge after that.
I need to do this. Thank you for the talks. They were fun. I have this, you know, when you talk about whether we should allow the capabilities together or pull them apart, it always seems that you're going back between sort of the static question and the dynamic question. And that, to me, that misses out the dynamic question, because, let me give you an example, okay? So in 1989, the United States killed military spending because the Berlin Wall went down and they cut it by, there was a ton of mergers. The aircraft, the generals, there's a controller for procurement, and there's a general at the head of the aircraft. So they had a couple of us down to the academy, the Aircraft Academy in DC, okay? And, you know, we were all talking about, they were worried about, you know, the auction for the Joint Strike Fighter, for the next big plane, okay? And, you know, Preston McAfee had models of, you know, 2 firms and 3 firms in the auction, and we all talked about it. Then the general got up and he said, you know, you guys have missed the whole point. The whole point was, you know, if we only have one guy doing military aircraft, that guy's going to be doing it forever, because he gets so far ahead of everybody. And every time that we had a major innovation, it was because somebody got way ahead. The other guy knew he had to do something different, and he did a whole different kind of steel that we can use on aircraft now, okay? Because he had no chance of beating the other guy, okay? So it wasn't a question of static versus dynamic, and I think that happens a lot of times. That's leapfrogging. It also happens, internally in a firm. I know Richard and I have discussed this before, but I still think I'm right, which is in a firm, if you let two drug companies get together, they're both trying to get something for cancer. Okay? If you put them together, what they're going to do is they're going to take the two paths that they were going, and they're going to take the one that's most profitable and do it first, and wait to see what happens with that before it does the second one. Okay? Where there are two firms, we would get it faster. The cancer drugs are important. I mean, and then if you read my slight reading of history, is keeping firms apart. What they do is they take different paths and they try and do different things. And we will get answers much faster by keeping them apart. And none of that is in the discussion of static versus dynamic part of it. I mean, I think the issue is is it good to put capabilities apart, and when is it good to put them together? And I'm sure it's different in digital stuff, what Carlos was talking about, than in drugs. And maybe we should do some studies of just the R&D when one is better than the other. That's my claim.
Can I respond to that? See, Ariel, I don't think we disagree at all. We had a lot of conversations, and I think we're actually on the same page. The relevant question for antitrust enforcement, again, is when are static concerns and dynamic concerns, when are they misaligned or aligned? And if your objective is to maintain diversity, that's a static objective as well as a dynamic objective. So they don't differ in that respect.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, sure.
I'm not very good at this. I could have a positive static thing and a negative dynamic thing. I could have two firms getting together, okay, especially in the digital stuff. I don't know that much about it, but I get them together and they are complements, and they actually produce goods jointly that are better. And then the negative thing is they're going to stop the two different research paths. It's not.
I'm having trouble finding an example that would imply that you're getting the wrong decision if you focus more or too much on the static issue. And there was a Lockheed, you might know, Lockheed McDonnell merger in which Dan Rubenfeld and one of the economists at the DOJ wrote a paper talking about innovation, about diversity and the importance of maintaining diversity. But there was no way in which that objective conflicted with the way you would ordinarily look at the merger. I can't imagine a case in which ignoring innovation diversity would somehow give you the wrong answer. That's the problem I have.
I'm not sure, but go ahead. But I think we agree, Ariel. It's just a way to present things. I mean, the way you have presented this example is also a way of saying right now and later, okay, short run and long run. So it's more a question of. But I mean, the thing is often static efficiency means that we focus on price in the short run, and we forget about investment and how that change in the future. Okay, so that is just a way to present the problem, but I don't think that.
All I'm saying is you might want to know when it's good to put, just from an R&D point of view, forget about static, when it's good to have the two capabilities together, and when it's good to have them apart. That's a different question, and that's all I'm trying to, and that question should be investigated. And it's probably different for digital than it is for drugs.
Yes, but you can, the two case, if you study the counter example in each case, you have to look at what you will happen short and long run. Okay.
I'm not disagreeing.
Okay, so it's just a way to present the analysis, in fact.
Let's move on. I think I want to get Inge first. David, you'll have your, don't worry, won't forget you. And then we have Nicolas say he wants to eat.
Thank you very much for a very interesting panel, and thank you in particular to Anna for the balanced representation of the Illumina Grail. But I would like also to zoom in on the static versus dynamic analysis, and thank you very much, Professor Gilbert, for your presentation. My first point is one of an observation, rather, in terms of the consumer welfare concept in EU competition policy, always having been wider, I think, than just the short-term price effects, and always integrating quality, choice, innovation in that consumer welfare concept. So I think that's speaking a bit to what you were mentioning on the two, not necessarily being very far apart always. But my question is about the non-alignment, as you mentioned it, between the static and the dynamic analysis. And one of the contexts where this comes up frequently is indeed ecosystems, where you often see the short-term consumer benefit of combination of complementary services versus longer-term concerns around contestability. But the other context in which we see this debate arise in the EU is around sustainability agreements, where competitors coordinate conduct in order to green the sector in which they're active, where the dynamics are actually the opposite, where you short-term have negative price effects, but arguably the efficiencies are longer-term. So I was wondering, have you integrated that dimension in your research? And more broadly, you know, are there lines for policymakers whether we should always give more attention to the long-term effects than to short-term? So how do you see this?
I think that one solution is also you can cast everything in static. The problem is what you define. What is the objective? If you consider only the consumer surplus without taking into account the impact on environment, fine. But that's you can call that the short-run situation. But if you consider I will say an extended consumer surplus, taking into account the consumer surplus plus the impact on environment, any way of measuring that, you solve the problem even in a static world.
I just want to briefly make one anecdotal comment, which is one of the first innovation cases known to man. It was an agreement among automobile manufacturers to allegedly suppress innovation for green technology. So you got to be careful.
Richard, I really enjoyed your summary of innovation and capabilities, and was heartened to see that the courts occasionally use the word capabilities. But I can't resist the temptation to ask you the bigger question, which is, with respect to capabilities, potential competition and so forth, that this all feeds into relevant markets. I mean, who really is a competitor depends not just on the share of a market they have, but on the capabilities that lie behind that. So I'm curious as to whether or not you see a role for capabilities framework in assessing potential competition. Clearly nascent competitors is one such category that's relevant for M&A, but also market power itself. Have you thought about that?
Definitely. Absolutely there is a role for capabilities analysis. The problem is how to the title of this conference is how to operationalize this stuff. And there are really, when I think about it, there are like 3 mountains to climb here. One is that you need to get over the legal obstacles to doing this, which are really, really, really tough. Then you also have to get over this kind of embedded mentality of the enforcers,
Right.
which they believe that the static and dynamic analysis is really perfectly aligned, or almost perfectly aligned. So it says that it's not that we're ignoring innovation, but we think we're doing the right thing when we promote, static objectives, including diversity.
Right.
And a third problem, frankly, is a lack of empirical evidence. Now, there is empirical evidence out there. There are a number of studies. Suggest you look at my book. Most of them show that mergers tend to have a possibly adverse effect on innovation. It depends upon how you measure it. When they're small, when they involve the kinds of numbers, small numbers, that attract conventional antitrust scrutiny. And certainly there's not a lot of evidence that monopoly is good for innovation, even though there are theoretical arguments under which it is. So I would just say those are three mountains to climb if you want to operationalize the dynamic capabilities. But my response is, yes, we really do need to do this. It is very important. There's no question that it's extremely important. And the concept of a research and development market that we thought about way back in 1993 is trying to identify those types of capabilities and when they are important and when there's some concentration of those capabilities that you have to think about. So yeah, I mean, let's operationalize it.
Please join me for a round of applause for our distinguished panelists.